Welcome, everyone, to the Inclusion Podcast. I'm Dr. Julie Costin.
And I'm Dr. Christy Preddy-Franzak. We're so glad you're here as we explore all things inclusion.
So whether you're a school leader, an educator, a parent, or simply passionate about inclusion, this podcast is for you.
In each episode, we go beyond the usual conversations, diving into what truly makes inclusive education work.
Together, let's make a difference, one conversation at a time. Here we go. Welcome to the Inclusion Podcast. Today's topic is called Two Very Important Legal Things.
Oh man, friends, you better buckle up if you're driving and even if you're not, because Julie and I get a little bit excited when it comes to things legal.
Well, why I get so excited is because these things are so important. And if you only knew them, you can use them in fancy ways and you can explain why this kid needs to be included.
Ooh, fancy ways. I like that. Let's learn some fancy ways.
Right. So the two big legal things we're going to talk about are two different cases. Okay. One of them is called the Ronker versus Walter court case. And we're going to talk about the Ronker portability test. I'm going to give you the bottom line real quick because you're going to see.
Right, Julie, because they might need the download to follow along and or just know that the show notes have tons of links to the court cases and the handout, okay? Because we're going to use words that probably people haven't heard or sound funny, like Ronker. Like not funny, but like it's not an everyday word, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the download where everything, I don't know how long, it's a 9-page download. And Julie, you said you were going to do 2 court cases. Tell me the other one first.
So, Andrew F.
Yep.
And the Ronker portability test. We're going to just talk about that from Ronker versus Walter.
Got it. Okay. So you're going to go to inclusiveschooling.com/download 47. You're going to go there as soon as it's safe to do so. inclusiveschooling.com/download 47. And you're going to get a 9-page handout that summarizes both of those court cases, as well as the show notes that give you additional links. However, Julie's going to tell us how we can use this in fancy ways. I like the word fancy.
Yeah. So the fancy ways are to mention these actual important aspects of these court cases. So in 1983, so everybody think about 83, side ponytails, think bright pink and neon colors, right? Those are the 1983 vibes we're going for. And there was a court case called Ronker versus Walter, which emphasized the importance of educating kids with disabilities in their least restrictive environment. And in this case became a piece of gold as far as I'm concerned. And it's called the Ronker portability test. Here's what it means. If services are portable, they should be brought to the student in general education. Okay? If services are portable, they should be brought to the student in general education. Another way to look at it is, can we move this support into general education classroom? And the answer will surprise you because when you use the Ronker portability test, you're going to find out that reading instruction is portable. It should be happening in the general education classroom. You're going to find that occupational therapy is a portable service. If you're working on a tripod grasp, that can happen in the general education classroom. You're going to learn that everything, nearly everything, is portable and can be brought to the general education classroom.
So, Julie, I got to just pause for a second because I think there's a couple of words that get us tripped up and we don't have to unpack them all, but I at least want to acknowledge. I think first the word that trips us up is the word inclusion. So you and I just change it and we go, kids should be included. Inclusion is beneficial. And then people go, but kids need supports. And we go, oh, right. We mean inclusion with supports. But then we go, supports don't mean humans. And then we go, oh, right. We mean supplemental aid supports and services. And then we go, okay. So when you're saying, Julie, things that are portable, can you kind of give us like in your brain or your Rolodex if we're in the 80s? What are you going through? Are you going through humans and materials and strategies? And like, what are you deciding and what is portable? What are you starting with?
I'm just going to give some examples and see if that gets us there. Speech therapy delivered in a separate room. That service itself is portable. And instead, speech therapists join students during group discussion and models those communication skills. Instead of sensory breaks, for example, happening in a designated sensory room, we're talking about a portable sensory toolkit to support students everywhere where sensory issues become a problem, like having noise-canceling headphones with them. Instead of small group math instruction in a resource room, we're talking about co-teaching with a math specialist in a general education classroom, right? So it's mostly what I'm thinking about is the actual service itself being brought to the classroom. I'm not worried as much about who's delivering it right now. I'm not worried as much about what it looks like, except I am worried that it's inclusive, meaning you can't just take occupational therapy from a occupational therapist's room and move it into a general education classroom and call it inclusion. We mean instead of working on handwriting in a therapy room, we're working on handwriting when it makes sense in a general education classroom where all the students are writing.
So yeah, that's really helpful. So this podcast, we're not going to talk about what it looks like. Because Julie, when you said the speech language therapist, I could see somebody with a cart with all their speech and language materials going up and down the halls and then pushing into classrooms. And that's portable. I got my cart. I have my stuff. I'm not in the closet, but it's also not inclusion. So today we're just trying to get people to understand what is portable. And if you get the download, if we skip too many maybe cognitive ideas, know that at inclusiveschooling.com/download 47, we have the Ronker portability test saying that these are going to be inclusive support. So what is the test, why it matters, what it looks like in action, the examples that Julie just gave, what the actual Ronker versus Walter court language, what it says. And then let's talk a little bit about how to apply it, Julie, because there's some key takeaways and some tips on that handout. And that's just the first half of it. We want to also cover the second court case, but I guess I wanted people to know that, yes, get the idea of portable, and then we got to figure out how to do that in an embedded way, which is why we listened to all the episodes of the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really simple. Like, I love the Ronker portability test because I'm like, oh, I get it. So if you look at the IEP services, all the supports, all the accommodations, all the special education things this kid needs, and you say, can this support move into the general education classroom? Does this support enhance participation in this classroom? And the answer right away might be no, because you're thinking of an old-fashioned way of doing it. You're thinking of, let's sit beside the kid and do it in this specific way, when in reality, you can support it better while the kid is actually using the skill. And then you start to plan for portability, where you start to say, if all these services are portable, how do we build them into the schedule in a way that makes sense? Meaning, when do we work on coat zipping? When we're headed out to recess. Not because it's 10:30 and there's an occupational therapist there, but because we're headed out to recess and we're going to give these cues to help the kid be able to zip their jacket. Okay?
And just so people know that in the show notes, we will also link to the research related to related services. So we've picked on SLPs and OTs, but this could be reading instruction. This can be anything that we're doing in traditional resource rooms, anything that we're doing in a quote unquote life skills room. We mean the whole gamut. Okay. But I'll make sure, Julie, in the show notes that we put additional links to how those professional homes to related service folks also support portability. Before we move on, I want you to say one more thing, Julie, about portability, because people start to then play yeah buts with us. Okay. And so will you just talk a little bit about that we're still going to use common sense and we're going to still have privacy, respect, all that. Okay.
Yeah, the exception. So legally, even the exceptions have been found, and there are exceptions to doing things publicly or in inclusive settings. And ready? There are things like G-tube feedings if the student prefers privacy. Doesn't have to be, but if the student prefers privacy, of course, bathrooming would be private. Of course, changing would be private. We're still using common sense. And the other that has come up is one-on-one mental health therapy services. Yep, that makes perfect sense. That's not going to be done in the general education setting. So again, before you're just thinking of all of the exceptions to the rule, start to think about all the ways that all these things can move into the general education setting. And when a student really, really, really prefers privacy, etc., we honor that.
Yeah. And I would even take it one step further that if they have interests, sometimes people go, well, all the kids are interested in X and they want to go do that together. And it doesn't look heterogeneous anymore. It doesn't look inclusive because it's all the kids that are doing something about, let's say, robotics. I'm just making that up. Of course, we still have times where we are in small groups that were more homogenous, but we're doing that by choice. We're doing that by affiliation or affinity. So that's maybe a little bit too hard for people to see. But sometimes they look at us and they go, oh, so we can never do anything that's not exclusive. We're not purposefully excluding. We're gathering together in ways that respect privacy, choice, interest, affiliations. All that is still part of the human experience. So, okay. So that be sure to get the download and the show notes so that you can really start to think about how what Julia's saying is segregation or separation is always the last resort. And it's always, to the best of our ability, temporary. So whenever you're thinking about the yeah buts or the exclusions, there's still hundreds of kids and hundreds of opportunities where we can enact the Ronker portability test. All right, Julie, second court case, second part of our handout.
So we're moving into 2017. And the Andrew F. case really did a lot for people to understand what's expected for students with disabilities. And so it was Andrew F. versus Douglas County in 2017. And this whole decision raised the standard for what constitutes FAPE, free appropriate public education. And so what it emphasized is that schools must provide meaningful educational benefit to students with disabilities, not just minimal progress. I want to talk about our most recent trip to many different classrooms that we saw, where I would say the expectations were the floor. There was nothing interesting, exciting, or meaningful happening in those classrooms.
In the basement, actually.
Right. And so what this court case does for inclusive education is it reminds us that we need to have appropriately ambitious IEP goals that students can make progress. We want to, of course, make sure IEPs are tailored to help students achieve their goals and the goals that non-disabled peers are achieving. And our programs need to challenge students rather than be this bare minimum achievement.
And Julie, I think that let's just pause here for a second, because you might say, well, how do you measure meaningful? And what's considered meaningful? Two things come to my mind. One, since 2004 in the United States, we've been required to write meaningful IEPs, meaning functional, measurable, the whole gamut. Then you're still like, but what does it mean? And if you looked for guidance from the Office of Special Education Programs here in the United States, they said, use common sense, friends. You all know what is meaningful or functional or measurable. None of those words are defined in federal law. But this court case took it further and said, no, we do have a sense of what is meaningful. And it used words like appropriately ambitious, challenge students, that their growth is comparable to non-disabled peers, meaning we can't set the bar so low. So let's say I have a significant support needs. Let's say, Julie, I'm deaf and blind, or let's say that I use eye gaze as my primary mode of communication.
Okay.
For me, when I look at the Andrew F. case, it says, so what? You still are a human who wants a sense of belonging, can learn grade level content. Like, just because my communication style is different than verbal, it's ableistic of me to think that I'm less of a human or I want less out of the school day because I'd rather do laundry or I'd rather look at my augmentative communication device and not my friends. Like, I want to look at interesting things in the world. I want to use my walker to go places that are interesting to me, not just this bare existence. Just, you know what I'm saying? I got 8 thoughts at once. Sorry. But it's like
Yeah.
it's defining for us what is meaningful.
Right. And so I think Christy and I are really fresh off a trip where we saw 35 different self-contained classrooms, and every single one of them would not have passed the Andrew F. standard. They were not using appropriately ambitious goals. They were not connected to general education content, curriculum, or peers. They were not aligned with grade level standards. They were not focused on meaningful progress. And so, again, this court case, when I said earlier, you can use fancy ways to talk about it, I mean that you have the teeth of the law behind you to say, in this court case, they proved that students should have services that are portable, if we're talking about Ronker, right, brought to them right to the general education classroom, and they should be aligned with grade level standards, and they should be appropriately ambitious, and they should be meaningfully focused on meaningful progress. Those two bits of information, if you understand them and read the court cases and go further in your studies, you're going to be able to articulate to folks why what we're doing is out of alignment with the spirit of least restrictive environment, as shown in 2 different court cases.
So be sure to get the download for this episode at inclusiveschooling.com/download 47. And you'll have the key takeaways, the show notes, all of the things needed to really think about what and why. And then all of our episodes speak to the how. What is the pathway to achieve those meaningful outcomes? And what do we mean by meaningful in the first place?
Thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe and catch up on past episodes where we share valuable insights, straight talk, and practical steps to challenge outdated special education practices. You can find every episode with the show notes at inclusiveschooling.com/inclusion-podcast to build more inclusive schools together.